Hello to everyone joining us. We'll get started in about 1 minute as folks are logging in here. Hello and welcome to everyone joining us. We will get started in about 30 seconds. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today for our next episode of Visionary Voices. We're super excited to have Jill Levenson with us today. Before we get started introducing Jill, I'd like to take a quick moment to thank our sponsor of this series, First Business Bank. First Business Bank is putting on some great offers for our chapters and has been a great partner to ATSA, and we're thankful for their sponsorship and making this series possible. With that, I will be introducing Dr. Jill Levenson. Dr. Jill Levenson is professor of social work at Barry University in Miami, is an internationally recognized expert in policies and clinical interventions designed to prevent and treat sexual victimization and perpetration. Her groundbreaking research on the link between adverse childhood experiences and sexually abusive behavior has paved the way for innovations in treatment programs that now utilize a trauma-informed approach. She is a SAMHSA-certified TIC instructor and specializes in applying TIC in forensic, clinical, and correctional settings. Dr. Levenson has published over 120 articles and 6 books, and her research has been funded by the National Institutes of Justice, the National Sexual Violence Resource Center, and the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. In 2019, she was named by the Journal of Social Service Research as being among the top 100 social work scholars in North America. She has been an ATSA member since 1993, and in 2019 was honored with ATSA's Lifetime Achievement Award. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jill. We're really excited to have you. You're on mute, Jill.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
So as we get going, I'll be asking you some questions. We'll also take questions from the audience. So folks, you can feel free to put those in the chat or the Q&A. I'll keep an eye on both places. And go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat as well. Jill, we always like to start off this by asking, what does it feel like to be considered a visionary voice in this field?
Yeah, I'm so flattered and humbled to be named among our field's many inspiring and impactful shining stars. So to be called visionary is just amazing and warms my heart. But as I said in my Lifetime Achievement Award acceptance speech, which was also one of the greatest moments of my life, I kind of landed here by accident. So sitting in the seat talking with you about this is just really special and in some ways still kind of surprising.
So I would love to hear your story about how you landed here. How did you end up in this seat?
Well, like most people, we end up in this field in a circuitous route. I started my career as a child protection worker in Baltimore County, Maryland. And then when I moved to Florida, I was treating survivors back in the early 90s when we were just starting to talk about child sexual abuse. And at the agency I worked at, there was also a sex offending treatment program. And so the psychologist who ran that program, who's now my husband, John Warren, I would say to him, wow, I'm really interested in hearing more about why your clients do these things to my clients. And he said, why don't you come sit in on a group? And I did, and I never left. And when I first sat in on that group, I guess the first thing I noticed was that they were just people like everybody else. And that it occurred to me, this is a prevention service. This is a protection service. If we're going to stop sexual harm, we need to help people stop harming others. And in those early days, we worked at this agency where, they had this contract, but nobody really knew very much about sex offending treatment at all. And so when we first started, we asked our supervisor, what should we do? And he said, oh, just talk to them about how their week was because you can't really help them anyway. And that is a true story. And here we are, 32 years later.
So I think one of the interesting things about your career is that you straddle the line between clinician and researcher, and you do both. And many of our members are one or the other. Talk to us about how you straddle that line and how one fuels the other.
Yeah, I think that's been a really important part of my journey and kind of surprising. So interestingly, I was always a clinician and I still am. I'm still on the front lines. I do 2 groups a week. I supervise, at any given time we have 100 people in a treatment program. So I am very much a therapist, I think. And so I never ever thought about going back to school for a PhD. In fact, when I thought about going back to school, I wanted to go to law school. I wanted to be like, there were times where I felt like I wanted to represent parents in child protection proceedings, and then other times where I felt like I would do something related to human rights or civil rights. And I kind of by accident landed this job. I was working at FIU, Florida International University, and the contract kind of shifted, and I landed this appointment as a temporary 9-month visiting instructor in the School of Social Work. And I thought, okay, I'll do this for a year and kind of see where it goes. Never thought about getting a PhD. But my dean, I guess, thought I would be a good PhD student and told me to apply to the program. And I did. And I went into it thinking, well, if I don't like it, I'll drop out. And I said to John, I'll be 40 by the time I finish. And he said, you'll be 40 either way. You might as well be 40 with a PhD. And I was surprised at how much I liked doing research. And in some ways, it reminded me very much of some of the clinical work we do, in that there was a puzzle to put together and a problem to understand and a way to conceptualize it and try and figure out what to do about it. And so that's how I ended up as a researcher. And of course, the best research we can do is about things that are familiar to us and interesting to us. And so I think coming into a PhD program with already 12 years of clinical experience, I had a much better sense than I might have, earlier on in my career, about what were the gaps that were missing and what I wanted to try to study and contribute to.
Super interesting. We had one comment in the chat box that said, thanks for encouragement for us older students considering getting my PhD. So I think that's exactly the point of these visionary voices, is to help give folks some perspective from folks that have been there before.
Yeah, and
Um,
I would add to that too, that as a seasoned clinician and being a researcher, they really inform each other. So obviously in our clinical work, we're thinking about evidence-based practices. So we're reading the literature and trying to figure out how it applies to the real people sitting in front of us. But also as a researcher, I feel like my clinical practice also informs the research, because how can we do research that will inform what real therapists do with real clients sitting in front of them? And so that's always something that I feel is just so important in order to move the field forward.
Totally agree. One of the things that we hear often on staff at ATSA is that students are super excited to be part of ATSA and want to engage, but there's that intimidation factor. And how do they go about and walk up to the one and only Jill Levenson and ask this question they have? What would you tell a student who said that to us?
Oh, I've got to tell you, I'm just a person like everybody else. Come and ask questions. And, I live in Florida. They say that Disney is the happiest place on earth, but ATSA is the happiest place on earth. Like, you go to an ATSA conference and everybody is just so warm and welcoming. And so our first ATSA conference was in 1994 in San Francisco. And we had been trying to figure out what to do with these clients that we couldn't help. And we'd gone to the library back in the days where you had to go to the library and actually pull research articles to read. And we're reading articles by these names like Abel and Laws and Marshall. And then there we are at this hotel in the elevator, with these famous people. And everybody was just so warm and welcoming and open, and you really could ask anybody anything. So the ATSA, to me anyway, has always had this really, a neutralization of any of that power imbalance. And in fact, we began the student reception back in, I think it was 2001 in San Antonio, I think was the first one. And I was in my PhD program trying to figure out exactly what I was going to do my dissertation on. And I got my dissertation idea having a cocktail in that student reception with Janice Marcus and Vernon Quincy. And they actually helped me figure out what I was going to do. So don't ever be afraid to talk to anybody at ATSA. I think it is just such a community that has a common goal of sharing knowledge and experience and process experiences and processing what we're doing with each other and learning from each other. So, yeah.
So pivoting just a little, anyone who's ever gotten an email from you knows that it ends with the sentence, if we believe in social justice, we can't pick and choose who it applies to. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that means to you and why you end your emails like that?
Yeah, I guess that's kind of my tagline now. I'm a social worker, as you know, by profession. And so I was really, raised and brought up and groomed in these ideas of social justice and advocacy. And I think we all go into this field, therapy, and this particular field, because we probably are naturally inclined to that. But I think we live in a world now, especially, that is very harsh, unforgiving, and very polarized. But humans are humans, and there are some people who do bad things and need help to figure that out. But I think that if we have social policies that are designed to enable human rights and social justice, they really have to apply evenly to everyone. Because when we start picking and choosing, then we put ourselves at risk. We're vulnerable to somebody else deciding that it doesn't apply to us or to some group that we belong to or believe is important. So I try to model that.
How do you balance when you're modeling that and thinking about that as you're providing treatment and services? How do you balance that empathy with accountability?
Um, yeah, that's a great question. I kind of think that they go hand in hand, actually. I think that when we model empathy to and for our clients, we create a safe space for them to be able to tell us the things we need to know in order to help them. So, empathy for our clients or therapeutic alliance is not about denying accountability. It's not about condoning or minimizing what our clients have done. But if we want to be able to help people, we need them to be able to talk to us. And if we want them to talk to us, we need to create safe, non-judgmental spaces. That doesn't mean that we don't enable people to be accountable. But I think that happens when we can hold contradictory things together in the same place, which is that generally good people can do bad things, and that people can learn, um, and learn not to do bad things. I think that sometimes many of our clients, they know that something is wrong or illegal, but they may not necessarily really, excuse me, understand or appreciate how harmful it is. Um, and so I think accountability really starts with us being able to create safe spaces for people to talk.
I think that's amazing. How do you communicate that to folks in a world where it's really hard to get the idea of multiple truths across, right? Or a yes and, as I like to call it. How do you communicate that to folks outside of this field or maybe even field adjacent to us?
Yes, it is very challenging because we live in a world that feels very black and white. And at the same time, sometimes I will ask questions like, if this was, if somebody you loved, your brother, father, friend, nephew, son, engaged in sexually harmful behavior, would you think that they should live under a bridge? I mean, I think empathy works all ways. So we also need to be able to put ourselves in a place where we can understand the perspectives of others. Um, but they're challenging conversations. How do we encourage the idea that that we can accept that people commit crimes and we want them to be accountable, but that justice is actually more than just the length of a prison sentence. And along those lines, I think that we need to be able to be speaking more and listening more to the voices of survivors to really understand what they need in terms of justice and healing.
So having come from survivor work and obviously every survivor is different and needs and wants different things, but as a generality, what do you think that voice of the survivor would tell, an ATSA member working with a client?
Everybody is different, of course, so it's always a unique perspective, but we have to be willing to listen to that and not assume that we know what people want. So when I say we, I'm talking about the collective we, but us as clients too. But prosecutors, policymakers, defense attorneys, victim advocates, all of us have to be open to hearing. And people want different things. For some people, accountability includes prison or jail time. But I think that many survivors, maybe not all, but many want to hear from the person that harmed them that they understand the impacts of what happened. They want accountability, which really means being able to um, acknowledge what a person to acknowledge what I did, to understand and articulate my understanding of the harm that was caused by it, and to figure out what the victim needs for healing. For some people, that apology, so to speak, or that acknowledgement goes a long way because it puts the accountability squarely on the person who perpetrated harm. And we know that victims often blame themselves. We know that they're often not believed, and when somebody takes responsibility for that in a genuine, authentic way, and trying to understand all of the ripple effects of what has happened here, that takes away responsibility from the victim and takes away the denial from other people. And that is incredibly healing, I think, for a lot of survivors.
That's really great perspective. Apology letters is actually something that comes up on the ATSA list once every 6 or 8 weeks. And there's always a great conversation about what folks think about apology letters as a treatment tool. What is your perspective on that?
Um, Again, I think it's really individualized. It's really unique for everybody. Many people who are on probation or part of the criminal justice system are not allowed to have contact with their victims. So, of course, we need to take that into consideration. And it's. I think that writing an apology letter can be a good exercise for our clients. So I'll start with that. I often ask people to tell the story of what happened through the survivor's perspective or through their lens, the lens of their experience. And that's kind of an interesting task for somebody to try and do. And sometimes just writing that letter and reading it out loud and getting feedback and hearing it is a good empathy building exercise. And by the way, I know that in our field, we've had these debates also about whether empathy is an evidence-based part of treatment. And, it may not have showed up in the original meta-analysis, and we can talk about all of the methodological, reasons why that might have happened. But I think that when we look at qualitative studies and we look at consumer surveys of people who committed offenses who are in treatment, and just in my own clinical experience, empathy is really an eye-opening piece of treatment. I think for clients, because again, people could do things that are wrong and not really appreciate why they're so harmful, and that can be an aha moment. I would add that we all know also that many of our own clients who have offended have also experienced victimization in many different ways in their own lives, not just sexual victimization, but physical abuse and emotional, abuse and neglect and living in dysfunctional families. And so getting in touch with their own trauma, I think, is also a pathway to empathy for others. And that's why I think it's important for us to be able to dive into our own clients' experiences, partly to help them trace the journey of how they ended up causing harm to somebody, but also to be able to reach into their own souls and deal with some of those old wounds and harms. They say hurt people hurt other people. And sometimes that's true without even realizing it. People do that without even realizing it. But I know that I'm not the only one who has had clients who originally said, no, I was never abused, I had a great life. And then as we start exploring, recognize what we might call, micro traumas that really are very impactful and shape the way people think about themselves and others, and whether the world's a safe place, and their sense of self as a person in relation to others. And all of those things contribute to how people end up offending.
Love it. We have a question from an attendee. What role do you think nurses play in sex offender treatment?
Nurses.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow. What an interesting question.
Agree.
Hmm. Well, just off the top of my head, since that's a question I've never been asked before, I would say a couple things. One is that obviously nurses are involved in with victims advocates in initial examinations, and so bringing their compassion and knowledge holistically about sexual harm and about the needs of victims, I think is super important from a starting place. But I also think that nurses are trained in compassionate care in ways that are similar to therapists, but nurses also have to suspend, their own personal feelings about a particular patient. And so I think there's a lot to be learned from different disciplines, including nursing. And finally, I would say that since we know that some of our clients are in hospital settings or confined settings or prison settings where nurses will be found, they will also play a role in different aspects of the healing of our clients. But nurses are good at being calm and non-judgmental and nice.
For sure. So I know that self-care is really important to you. What does that mean to you? What does the term self-care mean to you?
Yeah, self-care means a lot of different things, but I think that it starts with, recognizing that working in the sexual harm arena really can take a toll. It takes a toll by just being exposed to stories of pain and suffering from whether we're working with people who offend or survivors. And or family members or all of the above. So listening to those stories can be hard to hear. And it can be hard to maintain a positive therapeutic alliance if we feel angry, afraid, or disgusted by our clients. So we have to be checking in with that. At the same time, listening to trauma from anyone we're working with can lead to kind of a cynical worldview and feeling unsafe ourselves because we know of the dangers in the world and that people can sometimes be unpredictable or betraying or untrustworthy. But finally, I think we also all come to this work with our own set of experiences and our own trauma narrative, and they intersect with our feelings about what our clients bring to us. So self-care involves self-awareness, which is a willingness to talk and process with other people around us, which is why this ATSA community is so important. But also remembering to find fun and joy and relaxation and connection in our own lives to offset the disturbing realities that we are exposed to.
So I think that's really interesting. How do you encourage your clients to practice self-care?
Mm. I do encourage my clients to practice self-care. And as you know, more recently, I have been studying post-conviction traumatic stress, which is kind of a new and maybe surprising thing for us to be thinking about. But being involved in the justice system at all, even with brief contacts with police or court, can be traumatic for people. So I think it's important for us to validate that. And so I do a lot of psychoeducation with clients about what trauma is, because they might not even think of what they're going through as trauma and how it shows up, and how to breathe and calm the body down so you can think straight, and think more strategically and control your self-regulate, control your behaviors. But self-care, I think, for many of our clients, especially those who are on probation and registered, life is very different. There are a lot of restrictions, some may be necessary, some may be less necessary, that interfere with all of the things that are important to all of us, thinking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so self-care involves acceptance, being able to accept the consequences, even when they seem harsh or unfair, but how to build into your life things that can still be meaningful and purposeful, and connections with people who still are in our lives. Our clients have maybe become estranged sometimes from family and friends and from their careers and employment. So I think helping our clients stay mentally healthy is part of relapse prevention, and that includes helping them build meaningful activities and connections in their own lives that make them feel good about themselves.
One thing that I'm thinking about every time you answer a question is, wow, she just has such incredible passion for the work that she does, the people she works with, and her research. Where does that come from?
Um, well, I don't know. I guess, like I said, I'm a social worker at heart. My mother would probably say I was a social worker in junior high school, when I had a friend who she used to call a juvenile delinquent, and he was probably my first client. Um, but I don't know. I guess I've always been really irked by judgment and judgmental people. I don't really know why, but I've always kind of been like that. And so maybe that's part of my natural temperament. But I'll tell you also, something that happened to me very, very early in my career was, one of my very first cases after I got my MSW was a young woman who called the child abuse hotline to self-report that she had tried to smother her 3-month-old baby. And so I was fresh out of training, and I'm driving to this home visit with headlines in my mind. And I met this young, 23 years old, she was my age, young waif of a woman who looked about 12. And she was living in this 2-room trailer in Maryland in the heat of summer in July. And it was a small place. She was living with her husband, his ex-wife, and their 13-year-old daughter, and then this baby she had just had, in this cluttered place with boxes up over the window, so it was dark and hot. And she said to me, ever since my baby's was born, he just cries and cries. And I feed him and I hold him and I change him and I walk him and I put him down and I pick him up and I swaddle him and I talk to him. And it just won't stop. And just for that moment, I just wanted to make it stop. And then I realized what I did, and I called you. And that early experience, I think in some ways sort of validated some of my own inner temperament or personality or beliefs about people, but it was like, wow, this is not the evil person I envisioned when I was driving to this home. This is a really wounded person who I later learned had was sexually abused by her father. She had a mother who was mentally and emotionally unavailable and unable to protect her, and really didn't know how to parent effectively, but she really wanted to. And it's pretty scary for somebody to call and self-report that. Anyway, a few months later, she'd gone for this psychological evaluation as part of the whole process. And I guess the psychologist was asking her about her support system, and she said, "Well, I guess my best friend is my is child protection worker, Miss Jill." And I thought, first of all, um, how sad that, through her own life, maybe I was the first person who ever really listened to her, made her feel like what she had to say was important, but, or safe talking with. But also, that was like, that sealed the deal for me. Like, we need to connect with people regardless of what they've done, because that's the safe space that will enable healing for them. And that's part of breaking the intergenerational cycle of abuse.
Thank you for sharing that. It's an amazing story. We have a question. How might you use an offender's own past sexual victimization in their story around accountability to help understand and explain their behavior?
The same way we would with anybody else. People who have had trauma have lots of different maladaptive behaviors or survival strategies that they've used, whether it's addiction or other self-medication behaviors. Our clients are, how does trauma contribute to sexually abusing? Well, people are trying to meet their needs in unhealthy ways. What are those needs? Sometimes they're needs for attention or acceptance, or they don't feel good about themselves, and younger people look up to them and make them feel smart or important, or sometimes there are power and control issues, whatever they are. Sometimes, aggression is the way to feel in control of your life. And those behaviors aren't acceptable, obviously, but I think that the pathway to change is for people to gain some insight. We don't use that word anymore, really, because that sounds different from the relapse prevention, cognitive distortion, kind of goals that we have. But I think in helping people develop insight around how their own thoughts and feelings and behaviors developed helps them make sense of themselves. And when they do, then they can think about and make sense of themselves in a different kind of way based on the kind of person they want to be.
So, as you look back on your career, what are you most proud of?
Hmm. Well, um, I guess in line with what we're talking about, and I guess it sounds kind of cheesy, but I really am most proud of the connections I'm able to make with people who have really been rejected and feel lost to the rest of the world. Um, Again, I'll repeat it again because I think that that's a path to change and a path to disrupting the intergenerational cycle. But all of us want the same things. We want to feel safe. We want to be surrounded by people we feel like we can trust. We want to be empowered to be our best selves, and we need people around us to help us do that. And our clients need the same thing. When we go back to the old, Rogerian ideas of what it means to be a therapist, to provide a positive regard and warmth, and be able to reflect and validate how people feel, connect with them. It's the shared humanity that I think is important. So I that is something I'm proud of, that I think that we have built a program that is evidence-based and that does really good work in terms of programming and traditional goals. But I think we create a milieu that feels safe for our clients to talk about really hard things about themselves. And the other thing that I'm proud of is that I think I've been a good role model to my kids and grandchildren as a woman, as a person, as, someone who has been able to transfer sort of different chapters of my career, that I can change those things as I get older and as my life changes. So the authenticity of being really happy with what I do for work. I wake up every day and I'm excited to go to work, which is right here in my house, so it's an easy commute. But I do all these different things. I see clients and I do research and I teach and I train, and I just look forward every day to interacting with people and hopefully impacting them in some way for the better.
Along those lines, what would you say to a parent who is what I call in the thick of it? You know, in the middle of their careers, looking at that next step, young kids or middle-aged kids, middle school age kids. What would you say to a parent in that moment?
I think it's really hard to be a parent now. I'm glad that my kids are in their 30s, and that I'm not parenting younger kids right now. I think it's a much more demanding world. It's harder to set boundaries with the workday. The workday doesn't end when you leave the office like it used to. I think it's a scary world. It's a harder world. I think the boundaries have changed. So, what would I say to young parents right now? I think it's probably hard to navigate any full-time job with young kids, but with our work especially, um, part of we talked about self-care earlier, and I think when we're parenting kids, the work we do also, can shape our beliefs about that. And it's hard to feel like we're doing our jobs protecting our children, keeping them safe without being so overprotective that we deny them their own experiences, their own trial and error, their own ability to venture out into the world and have experiences. So I'm not sure I have any words of wisdom, but I think it's a tough time to be doing that. And I guess I would say what I say to a lot of people, which is trust your instincts.
That's great advice, I think. As we see if any, oh, one more question just rolled in. How prevalent is the role of pornography in the backstories that you hear?
Very prevalent these days, very prominent. And so we know that pornography doesn't cause offending, but I think it does change some things. So, and I know there's a lot of research on this. So, um, the world of pornography is different now than it was 20 years ago before we held, these things in our hand all the time. And so the access to the volume and variety of pornography at your fingertips is very different from, in our generation, finding a Playboy magazine at the home I babysat for, like, that was what it was. Um, and uh, and I think that there is research suggesting that repeated, prolonged exposure to pornography and certain types of pornography in particular can change. Um, they set up maybe unrealistic expectations for young people. They change, the ideas about what healthy sex or healthy sexuality might look like. Certain things become very normalized. So I find that a lot of my clients come into treatment with hypersexuality, sexualized coping. Part of that often is excessive pornography use that feels like it has become sort of uncontrollable for them, and also has led to some normalization of things that may not necessarily be healthy. And we also hear from clients that the saturation of pornography then can lead people to looking at more and more risque things, where then sometimes they're venturing into the illegal worlds of images and videos and material, even though perhaps they had not started out seeking that. So I think it's really a complicated online world that we're navigating not only with pornography, but also just with social media, and the boundaries are different online. And so our treatment has to acknowledge that and incorporate that. This is not these are not the same people who were coming to my program 30 years ago. You know, there's more sort of more traditional, maybe people, you know, with not all of them, but you know, more people with paraphilic, you know, interests. And now there are just so many different pathways to engaging in behavior that is sexually inappropriate, harmful, boundary crossing, boundary violating than it used to be. And I think the online world is part of that.
As we wait to see if any other questions roll in, my last question is always, if you could wave a magic wand and change one thing to prevent sexual violence, what would it be?
I knew you were going to ask me that, and I actually made some notes about it. So now I've got to find what what my answer was. Um, yeah. Oh, okay. I think we already talked about it, which is, so I'm glad I looked at my answer. That ending sexual abuse means getting better at understanding how and why it happens, right? And paying attention to the mixed messages, the inconsistent boundaries we allow in the world, the role models we see, which are very mixed nowadays sometimes. You know, how do young people look at leaders and try and make decisions about what behaviors are appropriate and what messages they want to absorb? So, you know, where do we go from here? I think going back to the basics of psychotherapy as a foundation for what we do. The common factors of psychotherapy, the decades of research have confirmed that engage clients. We've designed programs that are easily adapted to research methods because we want to study whether what we do works. But that by definition means that we have to, in some ways, forego the more individualized process of engagement and therapeutic intervention because we have to be able to um, uh, quantify, you know, factors to study. So by helping people understand their behaviors, their schemas, their cognitive themes, their relational patterns, I think that's really important in the work that we do and hard to study. So we also need to make sure, if we could wave a magic wand, that victims are believed, that people are held accountable, but that justice is more than the length of a prison sentence. And we need to help abused children get the help they need when they're young and help their parents and communities to create safe and resilient kids, to raise safe and resilient kids who know how to get their needs met in healthy ways, so that we can stop the intergenerational cycle of abuse and violence and try and create a healthier world, a healthier, more compassionate world.
We can do it, right? Just like if we only had that wand.
I think we can, and you know, one role model who always sticks out in my mind that ATSA knows well is Patty Wetterling, who, despite or maybe because of the terrible, unthinkable tragedy that was experienced by her family, we still see this remarkably resilient person who still has compassion and is able to use that to make sense of what happened to her and to empower herself to remain in the belief that most people in the world are good. And as she has said, that was the world that Jacob was living in, and that's the world that she wants to stay in. So that always resonates with me.
Thank you so much for that. Really appreciate your time today, Jill, and sharing your insights with us and some of these stories that I'm sure some of us haven't heard before, and certainly I haven't. And thank you again to our sponsor, First Business Bank, for helping us put on these series. We will be back with Visionary Voices in January with Michael Cito. And until then, we hope everyone has a wonderful holiday season and a great new year.
Thank you, and happy holidays to everybody. Thank you, Amber and ATSA. Thank you, not just for today, but for being in my life.
Thank you.